In most of your pictures, you'll find that you have some buildings in the foreground that are really easy to select, and then the middle ground buildings, which are also pretty easy to select, and then you'll have a cluster of buildings in the background that kind of fade together because they're the background layer. These buildings are not as important and really don't need as much detail. In fact, if you give too much detail, it will probably take away from the buildings in the fore and middle ground. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can easily select these buildings to make your background buildings. So let's start off. We're going to select the color layer because that's the one that should be towards the bottom. And I'm going to make a layer right on top of it. This layer is going to be the background buildings. And you don't need to be so faithful to this, to your photograph. And what I'm doing here is I'm just selecting this shape actually here that I just did is part of this right building. So I'm going to ignore it. Sorry, not the right building, the left building. Now, there's nothing here, so we don't have to worry about it. Then we have Freedom Tower. Just pretty iconic as far as buildings go. And then we have this building. And more or less, you can really just make this kind of thing up. If you don't see buildings to choose from, you can make it up. What I mean by that is, like, if you have clear sky, you don't need to insert background buildings. But if you do see background buildings and they're just not so clear which one's where, you can kind of make it up as you go. I see that there's another water tower here, but I'm not going to bother with it. And I'm going to go all the way down here. Now we're going to try to find a gray that works with this. We want it to be around this level gray. This is why it's nice to have made the picture gray and take the color out, because we can now get an idea of what gray would work here. Hit G for the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to fill this in. I think that's a little too light, so I'm going to change the color by switching colors and then fill it in. That seems like a good gray to me. We can maybe go one step grayer, but see, now it's basically the same gray as that one, as this building is. So I'm going to undo that and stick with this color. Let's hit deselect. Now we can also try adding some depth to this, and it's not going to be a lot. We can just do it on another layer. I'm going to turn that layer off. Just let's say Freedom Tower has this shape right here. So I'm going to add some depth just to this building. And then I also want to add some depth. You see that this roof right here, I think if we add to the selection by adding that, it could also be really nice and give some high impact. I'm hitting Shift, which lets me add to the selection. See, it's the opposite modifier of option. And I'm just choosing those two because I think that those two alone will be good high impact. And now I'm going to choose a one shade darker. Actually, this was already one shade darker. And let's fill this in. Deselect. Now the contrast is really slight, and that's because these are our background buildings. We don't need to have high contrast. See, like on this front building, we have the light lights against the darks, and that's because it's in the front. But in the background, all of the shadows and all of the darks and lights will have fewer steps in between, and that's because they are in the background, so they have less contrast. I see that this could really have gone down to go beneath the building, but I don't think that's such a big problem because I'm going to cover it up later with the details from this top building. But you know, you could always be more careful, and like I could add to this. I can add to it by hitting this thumbnail command. Now I can just add to the selection by hitting Shift with the lasso tool, and I can just make it go beneath this layer, and I probably should have done that in the beginning. And let's just hit the paint bucket tool, and I can just add to that, deselect. But that is how you would make your background buildings. I also think that I want to add this top thing, but that's really not such a big deal also. You want to add the things that will be high impact, but that won't take much time when it comes to your background building, when your background buildings. And I'm going to fill that in on its own layer with the darker color. Deselect. Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know.